Yeah, so here we are again, recording again, and this will be Heather's talk, the last talk of this conference. So, Heather, if you wish, you could present yourself and begin.
Sure. Thank you all for staying all this time. Um, and also to Daniel and everybody who's put this conference on. This has been really good. I'm definitely going to go back and check a few other things. Believe I'm sharing my screen now. Can everyone see it?
Yeah,
Okay. So, yeah, let's go on. So here's a picture of me with my bike. I am, I got bullet points. I'm a software engineer. I've been an engineer for 10 years and I've been doing closure professionally since 2018. And I like learning new things, and that's why I joined this conference. And really the like mentor-mentee stuff that Daniel was doing last year. I was just like, I don't know much about data science. Let me jump in and play around with some stuff. So apologies if this is not the most sophisticated data analysis that has been presented at this conference. I still feel very much like an amateur with this. I have lived in Oakland, California for 15 years. This is relevant to the talk because we're looking at street safety data in the city. And I have been car free for 13 years. 13 years ago, our car died and we didn't buy a new one. And I was pregnant with my third child when that happened. So we have been like raising our kids without a car. We bike places, we take the bus. And so street safety is like really important to me because walking to the bus stop, biking to school, all of those are things that we um, do a lot, and we want to be able to get to our destination safely. Um, there's an organization called TVVR. The Traffic Violence Rapid Response Team here in Oakland, which is just local citizens who care about street safety. And when someone dies because of a car crash, they they put together with the permission of the family and close friends of the person who died, like a vigil or an action, a protest action. And just a couple of weeks after this conference was announced, Michael Buravoy, who was a sociologist, a professor of sociology at UC Berkeley, was hit and killed by a driver in this crosswalk in this photo here on February 3rd. And TVVR um, put an action together with well, I guess his friends. He didn't have a lot of family permission because they said he would definitely want his death politicized. Um, I wanted to do a little zoom in on this picture here. Um, if you see this street where he died, he was in this crosswalk walking. Um, Back here, I don't know if you can tell, but there's little um, letters across the top here. It says Fairyland. There's a like children's theme park over there. It's very hot spot for for the kids. Lots of people think that it's what inspired Disney to make Disneyland, but a lot of small theme parks claim that, so we don't know how accurate that is. And there's, I believe, 5 lanes of traffic plus a parking lane here, which is a long way to cross if you are, well, for anyone really, but especially if you've got mobility issues, maybe you've got kids in strollers. Um, this street here is called Grand Avenue. And on the other side of these trees, besides Fairyland, there is a lake called Lake Merritt. And it is kind of an important place. Um, this photo here is actually from a week ago. It was 510 Day, which is like a celebration of Oakland. And like everybody goes down to the lake and chills and has a cookout, dancing, there's music, there's vendors, it's a thing. Lake Merritt is considered the jewel of Oakland. It's very much a place to go. They advertise it all the time for tourists as well. It was the first wildlife refuge in the United States for the waterfowl that came and still come to Lake Merritt. There's fairyland there. You can go sailing. There's playgrounds, vendors. This is a photo of, this is a screenshot of Lake Merritt here. And I kind of wanted to show you maybe we can zoom in here. This street here, if I don't know if you can see my mouse, is Grand Avenue. Fairyland. Yeah, okay. Fairyland is here. And I was looking at in particular the crashes that happen along Grand Avenue. This area just north of Lake Merritt is called Adams Point. That's the name of the neighborhood. And there's tons of apartment complexes. There's senior living facilities. There's another senior living facility here. So there's a lot of people who are going to be crossing Grand Avenue, which is frankly, I want to say it's like, 5 to 6 lanes dedicated to cars the whole way here. And if these people who live here want to come enjoy the park, they have to cross it, and it's kind of dangerous. So, wildly or luckily, California has a lot of data about the collisions that happen in California. Well, that happen and are reported. So they have this thing called the California Crash Reporting System. And did I have a link to it? It has data sets. These are where you can download the data sets for the crashes in the various years. The parties involved, like the driver, maybe their age, their sex, stuff like that. The people who are injured, the passengers or, the person crossing the street or whatever, their age, sex, and stuff. I think we have to 2016. At one point, there was a partial amount of data for 2015, but it looks like they removed it from their site. And this data has a lot of stuff. This is kind of narrowed down to what I was caring about. I cared about like crash date and time. It has stuff like lighting description. I didn't go into that, but it definitely has like nighttime street lights. So you could look at, are things happening at night? What's going on at 2 a.m. with regards to crashes in the state. These are just reported crashes. So if there was a fender bender that people didn't want to report because of insurance or whatever, then those don't end up here. And because it's reported data to the police are people, and sometimes they don't fill out everything in the data. So as you see here, these columns with latitude and longitude are empty. That is for most of the data set. I do not have longitude and latitude. I have primary road and secondary road. Usually if there's latitude and longitude, it's because that crash happened on a highway and there's not necessarily a secondary road for a cross street. So that's, yeah, I filtered down all of the state of California's data to just Oakland, and then from there filtered down the Oakland crashes into just along Grand Avenue on these particular cross streets. And because this is a small amount of like 16 or so, 15 intersections, I just like by hand grabbed the Latin long for the data stuff. But there are more programmatic ways to do that, which I'll talk about at the end of the talk. So these are the cross streets that like are these ones here, the names of the streets along here. Oops. And so I made a heat map of where the crashes are happening in Oakland or along Grand Avenue. And I have that here. Let me make that a little bigger. And so you can kind of see which intersections have more crashes. As you zoom in, the intensity of the red changes a little bit because you're focused. But you can see this here is actually where Michael Buravoy was hit. His data is from 2025, and I did not include that data in my analysis because the year hasn't finished yet. So he's not included in this, but there have been clearly other crashes. These are not all necessarily deaths or injuries. These are just all crashes. But I really like the heat map here. And then I have a heat map for just injuries to pedestrians and bicyclists. And let me bring that up here. I'm going to have the clay make it. Oh, that's the wrong one. That is not a heat map. I thought I marked it. Slide heat map of Grand Avenue injuries. This is it. right here. So these are the injuries that are happening. And there's injuries that involve a bicyclist or a pedestrian, not injuries that involved other people in cars. But those are also important. We don't want anyone getting hurt. But yeah, I really like this visualization. The heat map is super, I don't know, it feels kind of nice. I think I should also show you, this is Google Street View of Grand Avenue. So like it changes as you kind of go through, but you can see, like if we go to where Michael Buravoy was out in front of Fairyland, that's all down here. This is very much like you've got a lane for parking, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lanes for traveling. So it's 6 lanes altogether dedicated to cars at this section. And this is where he was. So it's unpleasant if you live in the apartments over here to get across the street. So I also wanted to know, what are the vehicles crashing into? So at this point, I just wanted to play with the data and see what I could get out of it. So the next few graphs and stuff is just like me asking little questions. So let's see here. Let me go to where it is in my, okay, it'll show up on the right. Yeah, I made this little pie chart. Cars are crashing majority of the time into other vehicles. There are bicycles, parked vehicles. That's another fun one. People need to pay attention to the roads, I think. Pedestrians, fixed objects that might be a pole or a fire hydrant. There's this concept called non-collision, and I've been really trying to figure out what non-collisions might be. I think it might be an example of a non-collision may be when someone opens their door into a bike lane and the bike person gets hit by the door or runs into it. Like the car itself wasn't moving and colliding in anything, but there was still a police report. So I think that's what that entails. Grand Avenue has a lot of terrible bike lanes like that. And then another one I wanted to show was like the crashes over time, what people are hitting over time. So maybe I'll make this a little bit bigger. That helps. That did not help. But the blue is the motor vehicles. Bicycles are the light green, and then there's pedestrians are the red, and then there's a few other things. Sometimes they hit other objects. And it looks that like we've had fewer crashes, actually fewer car crashes, cars hitting other cars since like 2016, 2017. And so that's good. But I think that the if you narrow it down to just like pedestrians and cyclists, it hasn't, yeah. We were hitting them a lot, I guess, in 2016 with 17, but it hasn't really gone down since 2018. Maybe even looks like it's increasing for the people who are most vulnerable on the street. So I was also kind of interested in using some of the those other data sets that had the injured passengers and witnesses, or just to kind of see what I could pull from that data. And so this is one of those graphs. I don't know if we need to see the code, but this is a dot plot of over time. So here's 2020, 2025, the ages of the people, and then green means they were a pedestrian. The brownish, orangish is the bicyclist. And then down here, there's a row down at -10. Those are ages when they didn't report the age. So like the police officer who took the report didn't write down the age of the person injured. Because that happens sometimes. So I just set that to -10 just so it would show up on the plot map, but didn't look like it was children getting hit. Like I didn't want to set it to 0. It's not babies. So those are just along there at the bottom. And then I also looked at, just because I could, ages of people who are injured in a histogram. Again, this tall overlapping column at the left is the people who are -10 years old. That's just I didn't have an age, so I filled in -10 for them. And I guess this is kind of a good gut check for the data, because it does make sense that you'd have more bicyclists in the like 20 to 40 age range than you might have pedestrians, because usually it's people in that age range who are, they have better balance. They feel like biking more than maybe people in an older age range. So that's kind of a good, a good sense of like, hey, this seems right for Oakland. I would love it if, more older people biked, but the street's not really meant for that right now. There is a bike lane, but it's not protected. I don't know if you saw that in the pictures. Do I have a good, yeah, it's hard to tell in these pictures I had saved off. But Grand Avenue is an interesting case because this year they are working at redesigning the street because that's being repaved. And so there's a chance for the Department of Transportation to repaint the lanes, maybe give a buffer to the bike lane, or maybe reduce the number of lanes so that it's not so many lanes to cross when you're walking across the street. So I have, yeah, they're up for repaving. They have a couple design options. There's been lots of meetings, even this week, about what's going to happen. TVRR, I'm on their Slack, and they're always talking about, there's a whole channel for Grand Avenue redesign and trying to push towards better street design. But one thing you got to think about is like what street designs are working right now to reduce these injuries and deaths. This slide I pulled, this severe and fatal crashes are highly disproportionately concentrated slide I pulled from the 2024 Safe Oakland Streets Annual Information Report. They actually used this exact slide in a meeting this past Tuesday about the street safety in Oakland. And in 2018, they decided that they looked at where people are getting hurt and learned that there's 6% of Oakland streets account for 60% of severe and fatal crashes. And so there's this concept of a high injury network. Grand Avenue is in that network. It's considered a high injury corridor. But there are other streets, and I'm going to talk about one. It's Telegraph Avenue, which is also a designated high injury corridor. And Telegraph Avenue was an interesting use case here because in 2015, it was basically looking like what Grand Avenue, there's just like there's like five lanes of traffic, no infrastructure for biking, no infrastructure for people taking the bus, or really much infrastructure for people walking. And then in 2016, they started changing it. And so with the fact that I have data from 2016 until 2024, we can see how things have changed over the course of the changes that have happened to Telegraph Avenue. So I wanted to show you some Telegraph Avenue. This is another situation where I grabbed by hand the Latin longs. And I want to show a heat map of Telegraph Avenue crashes. Let me see if I can. So you can see what Telegraph Avenue looks like. Here we are. Let's see here. Yes. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. But you can see here's Grand Avenue, and then here's Telegraph Avenue along here. So they actually meet, and unsurprisingly, where Grand and Telegraph meet, there's a lot of red. These are the number of crashes. And this is the number of crashes over the past 10 years, or since 2016 through 2024. And this whole street, it goes all the way up to Berkeley and goes further down to downtown. But I was looking at just from 19th Street to 41st Street, and that spans two neighborhoods. And I chose those two neighborhoods because the city of Oakland, when they were upgrading Telegraph Avenue over the past 10 years, specifically had a whole plan just for those two neighborhoods. And they also, interestingly, didn't update them at the same time. The more southern neighborhood called Kono got upgrades sooner, and the more northern one, it took a little longer, but they used their learnings from the Kono upgrades and applied them to the more northern one, which is called Pill Hill. Kono is short for Koreatown Northgate, which is this area here. And then right here, there's a bunch of hospitals and medical centers, doctors' offices. And so the more northern neighborhood is called Pill Hill, which is kind of funny and clever, I guess. But yeah, these were the intersections I cared about along. Yeah, I used these as the secondary roads, and I used Telegraph as the primary road when I was looking at the data. So here's a picture of Kono from before they did anything. So this is from 2015. Like I said, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lanes of traffic, and then there's parking. This is kind of a parking lane, kind of a traffic lane. There's no infrastructure here, except for like a very faded crosswalk, which is unfortunate. And you can tell this is Kono because it has the Kono banners. So, and then in 2016, they started adding some improvements. They striped a like bus. Well, I guess this is a bus stop, but it has a bike Shero on it to be like, hey, the bikes can go here. There's a bike lane a little further on. This design is a little bit better because now we have a space designated for bikes. If you are crossing the street here, like this person, you're only crossing 3 lanes of vehicle traffic instead of 5. So the distance in which you are at risk of being hit by a car has been shortened. So hopefully you are less likely to get hit by those cars. But the things that are missing here are like protection. Like paint is not protection. Paint is just paint on the ground. It's not going to stop a car from hitting somebody. So this was like a first draft basically here. And then in 2019, they added this like little elevated bus stop thing where if you were waiting for the bus, you could come out and stand on this plastic rubber device. And there was a ramp here for bicyclists to go along it. But like it's a little bit more protection for the bicyclists because like, you know, cars would have to bump into the bus stop first. But it's not permanent. And as you see, like over here, they did not change anything. And I forgot to change the date on this one. I believe this is 2020, 2021, where they added in the little bit of changes. They have some beefier bollards. I don't know. I guess if you looked here, there's actually really flimsy flex posts is what they call them that were supposed to be standing up, but have been kind of run over by cars here and been flattened. So the next year, they're still plastic. They're not really going to truly stop a car, but they're a little bit beefier, maybe more visible to drivers. And then now Kono has this bus stop. This is the same bus stop we were just looking at. It's now got cement. It's a curb protected bike lane. There's leaning posts that you can lean on while you're waiting for the bus. This side also has some curb protected. We're not depending on paint. Because when there's paint there, as you see, like this car is parked in that paint lane. So, which makes it harder to see around them and can cause problems. So Kono has slowly had these upgrades over the past decade. And then here's Pill Hill, a section of that a little bit further north. This is from 2021. So while Kono was getting some upgrades, Pill Hill, this section did not get so many upgrades. So this is just a few years ago. There's no bike lane. It's back to how Telegraph was or Kono was in 2015. But very quickly, like this was what, 2021, and within a year in 2022. And now, like they have, you know, they took the concept of like that cement bus stop and just put that in and didn't have to do the slow build up for that. And you can see these are low leaning posts. There's a bench. So it's a little bit better. So one thing I wanted to look at was, did these changes over time actually help, right? And Daniel was very helpful in showing me how to normalize the data. There's like the amount of crashes in Oakland is a huge amount. And when you're looking at just a small strip of street, this is Telegraph Avenue just for 10, 20 blocks, 19th Street to 40th or 41st. So 20 blocks. There's just a lot fewer. So it's hard to compare. But as you can see, this is Telegraph overall in that length. it has decreased. Like Oakland crashes have decreased over the years, which is great, but Telegraph went a lot further down, which is super good. And then I wanted to look at what about the neighborhoods. So I kept Oakland is still the green one and Telegraph is still the brownish zigzaggy one. Kono is this purple line for the normalized, and Kono does have like a steady down. Things are a little spiky over here because we just have such little data. The numbers are so small. But Kono, as you see, like over time, as they were adding improvements, the number of crashes decreased. Pill Hill did not decrease until, I guess, 2020. 2021 is what we had seen, and 2022 is when they put in those changes I'd shown you. I think we can all agree 2020 was a year that I don't know if the data is very descriptive of what was going on, but as you can see, like since they have put in those changes in Pill Hill, it has not gotten to the levels it was before 2020. So this is a good, I think, indicator that like, so these changes are helping reduce the number of crashes on Telegraph. And then I mentioned at the end, I would talk about how can we do this more programmatically instead of me like having to pop in latitudes and longitudes and be able to show heat maps. There's actually an amazing amount of open data, and there's this data set called that does center lines, and Daniel really helped with this. I can actually just show you. Do I have the center lines open? Maybe not. Maybe if I just click it, it shows up. Where the county of Alameda, which is the county Oakland is in, has a data set of all of like the segments of the streets. So and like if they're a local street versus a highway street, and they have the lat longs and every single little bits. So with that, plus there's some neighborhood polygons, which are interesting. Do I have that here? We have, so these are the neighborhoods in Oakland. Here's Adams Point, right above Grand Avenue. This right here is Pill Hill, like this along here. Actually, if you're very specific about this, it says Koreatown for Telegraph Avenue. This is Telegraph Avenue right around here. There is some overlap, but because the neighborhoods are not, nobody's neighborhoods, like no one's like, now you're entering another neighborhood. There's some wishy-washiness about neighborhoods. So there's that data. And oh yeah, I didn't show you where that data was. The neighborhood data actually is here. You can get it in JSON. And then using this, Daniel worked with the primary and secondary streets and was able to, like, if there's a primary and secondary street for a collision, finding that on the street, the center lines data to figure out which street segment it was, and then looking for the street segment within the polygons of the neighborhood, I was able to show some interesting stuff, and I wanted to kind of show that. And I think this is where, like, if you want to do something for more than just like these couple of streets, you wanted to look at the whole city, or maybe other cities like Berkeley or Emeryville, which are nearby. Do I have them? Oh, I have them over here. Let me switch over to it. So this is what Daniel had made up. So it's kind of fuzzy, hard to see. But these segments are all segments where there's more than 10 crashes in the time frame, I believe. And the redder it is, the more crashes there are. The lighter green is fewer crashes. And you can actually kind of see where these high injury corridors are. This is Fruitvale. This is International, very well known. And then here's Grand Avenue, where it's a little bit red here. And if we zoom in here, you can definitely see, like, this is Telegraph Avenue. And then these other red ones, like this is San Pablo Avenue. That's also on the high injury network. And if you wanted to look specifically at Telegraph Avenue, this, we used all of Telegraph, but if we zoom in here, this red part here is Northgate. That's the no part of Kono. So this is part of that. So from here down to here is what we were looking at for the Kono upgrades. And you can tell it had, 78 crashes in this time frame. And then up here is Pill Hill. There were 26. There were fewer. It's probably why they didn't rush to update that section of the street as fast as they did the Kono area. but you can kind of see that. And I think playing with this is going to be really interesting for other little case studies in Oakland. I also wanted to show you Grand Avenue just because, let me see. So here's Grand Avenue. I was looking specifically at from here to over here, I believe it was. And you can definitely see that right here, like it's a bit redder. This is Adams Point neighborhood. This, I guess they split this into a lake-wide, but I didn't know that name of the neighborhood. But yeah, I think this is really interesting. We kind of found the neighborhood polygons and the street, the center lines nearer the end of working on this project. So I'm sad we weren't able to do more with it, but I think it's really interesting. And I think that's my time. So if there's any questions, I'd like to open that up. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thanks everybody for being here at this time. And yeah, I'm so glad we had this talk as a way to celebrate the end of this conference. And yeah, we have some time to discuss it. And we've seen all those different talks about data stories. And I think what we've seen a lot is that we care about technology and automation and all that, but sometimes we also care about the data and what it means for us. And that's what I think that was the perfect example of what we should do more, I believe. Just have this curiosity and respect for the data. And I think this story, maybe one thing you didn't talk much about is the actual effort to get a sense of whether the data was correct, right? That, I was lucky to have a few conversations with Heather. And then, if you happen to talk about any street in Oakland, Heather would have something to say about that street and
Yes.
whether the numbers make sense. And here in this demo, you even showed us how we could care about the little piece of plastic and the state of that, but still have the citywide picture. So yeah, have this multi-scale storytelling. I think that's amazing. And thank you so much for that. We have some time for questions. Does anybody wish to ask anything? Oh, Siavash.
Do you have any complementary data for this accident, for example, so you can dive into what is the root cause, or for majority of this accident, driver is drunk or pedestrian is not paying attention and something like it?
So I think so here I've pulled up, this is what they share here. They have types of collisions. So they'll have things like it was a rear end or a side swipe. I don't know, that's the collision types. If there's photographs, if it was highway related, they have, they even mentioned the weather at the time, like when this one happened, it was windy. And the road condition, daylight description. I don't know if they have fault on it yet, like, or reason. They do mention the primary collision factor violation. So yeah, they do have that. I'd have to like look up what these are. It could be speeding, it could be distracted driving or inebriated driving. So there is a factor for like why it's happening. I did not go into that because I think street design can actually kind of prevent some of those whys. Like if you design a street well enough, then the speeding reduces. When there's, or people take more time to make a right turn. A couple years ago, my youngest, he's okay now, but he was hit by a car on his way home from school. And the driver definitely did not yield to the stop sign. He did not stop. But also the factor of the street design right there, the driver was turning onto a very busy street and was looking at the oncoming traffic, looking for a way in. And I think because the street he was turning onto was designed so poorly to be basically a highway next to the school, that meant that the driver didn't feel like he should, he was worried about his own safety, right? About these oncoming cars, and wasn't looking at who's on a sidewalk or who's in a crosswalk. And so if that street gets redesigned, those reasons of like, hey, he didn't stop. Well, it's like, why didn't he stop? We don't have that. But I suspect, I wasn't there, but I know that street well, and I suspect he was looking at oncoming traffic, finding a way in, and not doing his due diligence. But like, it would be easier, I think, for him to do due diligence if that street he was turning onto was designed for slower traffic, But yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, they do have like what caused the collision from what the perspective of the police is, because they're looking at what the police are writing down, which also means it's like, what did the driver say? Because they tend to believe the drivers more than they believe like the pedestrian or the bicyclist who got hit, unfortunately. So if the driver says they weren't looking at their phone, they won't write that down as an issue because the driver's not going to admit that, right? So yeah, this data, it does have like what the police wrote down as the actual issue, but you don't always know the actual issue immediately, even based off of what was reported, is what I'm getting at. Sorry, that was a long-winded thing.
Yeah, there is a question by Jacob. Jacob, by the way, if you wish, you can use your voice, or I could read whichever you prefer. Yeah, maybe I'll read the question. So Jacob says, hi, Heather. Oh, yeah, background noise. Yeah. So, hi, Heather. In Dallas here, so lots of this hits close to home for me. And I ought to start looking at our available dataset myself. Thanks. Is the code for these visualizations, especially the last one with thick lines, in your graph app repo?
Yes, it's in the repo. So that was in the locations.clj, because that was what Daniel had contributed a bit. I can even kind of probably bring it into view because I've got my Emacs open in my other screen. But yeah, it's in the notebooks, yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, I'll just say that in the coming few weeks, with all talks of this conference, we will be working on kind of polishing the notebooks, and hopefully we will publish most of them in one space of notebooks of the talks. And hopefully, if Heather, that's okay, we'll also work on this one and making it into this part of this collection.
Yeah, I feel like my notebook is kind of a mess, but probably everyone's is.
Everyone's, yeah, everyone's notebooks, as far as I know. Yeah. Yeah. Any more questions to Heather? Yeah, maybe I'll ask. I think, what you demonstrated here was this combination of a few practices. One of them was getting informed by the dataset, running a query and getting some numbers. And the other one was contributing to the data, but by your annotation, finding the positions and pointing at certain points, right? So it is this bi-directional relation with the data. You get some answers and then you contribute more data. And that's the way it is in geography, right? And then there was another thing, which was storytelling, like creating this whole amazing story, which is very visual with, pictures and so on. And so I'm wondering if you have some thoughts about the workflow, the desired, the imagined workflow we could have with some better tooling that would allow us to perform this kind of research?
Yeah, good question. I mean, because I'm not a data scientist, at the beginning, a lot of those little graphs, like the plot chart for the ages, was just like, what can I do? Can I even get the chart to show up? As for like the cycle for the workflow, I mean, I just think about all the things that I could have done better, but it's not necessarily the tooling. Like I could organize my data set better and filter better and, make my code not repeat itself 5 billion times. I also could have a better understanding of geography and GIS systems. But as far as this like back and forth with like working with the data and using the SciNoj tools, I don't know, I found them pretty useful. I think there's a few, so I used eCharts, I think, for most of these, but there was also some other ones. I was trying out different graphing libraries in the SciNoj world to see what I liked the best. The eCharts made the beautiful colors, I think, very nice. But I definitely used Plotly as well. I think trying to narrow down like what is the best library for that was a little tricky. I ended up just going what looked the nicest for this presentation. But like the things that I guess I struggled with in working on this was like, here we have like all the SciNoj tools and libraries and like which one of these are currently being actively worked on and are like the best pristine ones, or is this a library that like has been neglected because they've moved on to something else, or is it just been neglected because it's closure, and so like once you have something good you don't need to really change it, like that happens in closure too. So you're like, is this library outdated, or is it like this is the gold standard here and we don't need to touch it anymore? But yeah, I think that was like the biggest thing because I was new to the SciNoj data science tools. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and yeah, thanks, Siavash, for this comment. Do you wish to say anything more, Siavash? Oh.
No, just this.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good reminder that it is like this story of social responsibility, as you said, which is great inspiration for us. Yeah, and yeah, maybe one thing I'm wondering about is about your conversation with the other people who are involved in this, because that's something that was a lot of what you did was talking with people who are involved and are part of this local struggle. And would you like to tell a bit about that, and maybe a bit about what you think they need, what would actually help people with this, struggle?
Yeah. So the Traffic Violence Rapid Response Team, the TVRR, I happen to just know a few people in it, and people would mention it when I was on a bike ride with them. But I joined their Slack, and so I see they have a whole channel dedicated to Grand. I don't know if they have a channel for Telegraph. They might. But I would talk with them. Like they are the reasons I narrowed down Grand from to this segment from here to over here, because they were like, that is the part that's getting paved this year. That's the part we are really trying to push for changes. Can you show us what's going on that section of Grand? So they were the ones that requested this segment of Grand to be looked at. And they were also the ones that inspired the heat map, because one of them had made a similar heat map using, I think it's the same data. The California crash data was renamed like a year or two ago, so I think they're still using the old acronym. But they had made a heat map, and I was like, that is super useful, and I want to see what I can do with creating a heat map as well, which was useful for Telegraph because they had just made it for a little bit of Grand. And like I went to the Michael Buravoy action that happened. And there's weirdly a lot of my friends live in Adams Point, and so they had, there was signs for like, street safety can't wait, like we can't, so I guess I've talked to them a lot about this, but sometimes I'd ask like, hey, what do you guys want? And they're like, whatever you can get us. And I was like, well, that's not helpful. I need it a little bit more narrowed down. yeah, they were definitely useful for like, this is the limit of what we want to look at for this change that's going to be happening soon. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah, and maybe, I thought there was a question, or maybe I was wrong. Yeah, maybe one thing we can start thinking about is how we collaborate on geography enclosure, which is something we mentioned earlier, and I think Heather, you also commented on that on our chat. And maybe Jacob, if you're curious to explore similar data situations, maybe we can somehow collaborate on that. And I think from our experience, there were a few of those repeating tasks, which are actually, as in a way, a small set of tasks that are worth documenting and clarifying. And sometimes some of them were about just the slightly different data formats we may get, like there is GeoJSON and a few of the other geographical data structure. There are the different coordinate systems, and maybe I'm surely Siavash can say more about that. That sometimes you have these latitude and longitude, and sometimes these are local coordinates. And I think Heather, in the data sets you were exploring, we had a few, like a diversity of a few different coordinate systems. And yeah, and there is this story of intersecting different geometries, like intersecting the center lines with the neighborhoods, and a few variations of that, and creating an index structure that makes it faster, and maybe a little more than that, and maybe this is maybe the core of something that is useful in very diverse geography situations. And so I believe we could collaborate on creating something clear around existing libraries that is maybe just a little layer of ergonomics. And so I'm really hoping we can work on that. And so I wish to express this hope, because there are a few people here who may wish to be part of that. Yeah. We're getting closer to the end of this part. And maybe, Heather, you would like to conclude and say some more words about future hopes, or anything you wish to say?
Yeah, I mean, future hopes. I am looking into learning more about geography this summer. I'm looking into possibilities for like a certificate through, I think it's UCSF or SFSU, one of the San Francisco universities. And yeah, I think bringing some of this analysis, especially at the end where we had those green to reddish color lines, where we can see the whole like citywide, being able to kind of take the larger data instead of just these like little unique spots. There's definitely more streets that are in the high injury network that you could look at. There's actually a rather sad story about one particular street, International, where they added a bus lane, but they didn't do things to keep cars from going into the bus lane. And so then everyone used it to speed, and it actually increased the number of deaths on that road. And so that becomes the community then starts not liking bus lanes because it was poorly designed from the get-go. And so like we have like those complicated stories as well, where we want bus lanes, we want the buses to be regular, but like if we're not keeping the rest of the community safe while we do that, it has some impacts. And so looking into things like that would also be, I think, interesting, but sadder because there's been a lot of deaths on that street. So
yeah, thank you so much. So and I think as a few of the talks we had today and yesterday, it was a beginning of something, and I think that's promising for us. And thank you for this inspiring story. I think we'll now say goodbye to the last recording of the conference. Maybe a few of us will stay longer to chat a little more about anything. And today we began with an unrecorded part, which was this fascinating conversation where Henning was telling us about history and so on. And maybe we'll see what happens now in this unrecorded conversation. And so thanks everybody. We still have a few of the speakers here today, of very diverse hours and time zones. And thanks everybody so much for this day. and see you on the next conferences.